Welcome to Summarize This. Today, we're diving into one of the most influential books ever written, The Republic by Plato. Written around 380 BC, The Republic is a philosophical dialogue that asks a deceptively simple question: what is justice? But from this starting point, Plato constructs an entire vision of the ideal society, explores the nature of the human soul, and challenges us to think about reality itself. This isn't a light read. The Republic is dense, complex, and spans 10 books. It covers political philosophy, ethics, metaphysics, epistemology, and even aesthetics. It's been studied, debated, and analyzed for over 2,300 years, and it continues to shape how we think about fundamental questions of human existence. In this comprehensive summary, I'll take you through the complete arc of this remarkable work, from the opening conversation about justice, through the construction of an ideal city, deep into the famous allegory of the cave, through Plato's theory of forms, and finally to his vision of how societies rise and fall. Whether you're reading The Republic for the first time, revisiting it for a class, or simply want to understand why this book has been so influential, this summary will give you a thorough understanding of Plato's arguments, his method, and his enduring insights. Let's begin. Before we dive into the content, we need to understand what kind of book this is and how it was written. The Republic is structured as a dialogue, a conversation between multiple speakers. This was Plato's signature philosophical method. Unlike later philosophers who wrote treatises and essays, Plato wrote dramatic dialogues that show philosophy in action. The main speaker is Socrates, Plato's teacher, though by the time Plato wrote The Republic, probably around 380 BC, he was using Socrates as a character to express his own philosophical ideas. Why does this matter? Because the dialogue form is essential to understanding Plato's method. He doesn't give us a finished system to accept or reject. He shows us the process of philosophical inquiry, how questions lead to other questions, how definitions are tested and refined, how reasoning works through problems. We're not passive receivers of doctrine, we're participants in a conversation. The dramatic setting is carefully chosen. The dialogue opens with Socrates and Glaucon returning to Athens from the Piraeus, the port district, after attending a festival for the Thracian goddess Bendis. They're stopped by friends, Polemarchus and Adeimantus, who insist they come to Polemarchus's house. There they join Cephalus, Polemarchus's elderly father, and eventually the sophist Thrasymachus. What's significant is that this takes place in the house of metics, resident aliens, wealthy foreigners living in Athens but not citizens. This is neutral ground, outside the usual Athenian power structures. And the conversation lasts all night. This isn't a casual chat, but an intensive philosophical investigation. The Republic consists of 10 books, what we would call chapters. These weren't necessarily written as separate units, but represent logical divisions in the argument. Book 1 introduces the problem of justice through attempted definitions that fail. Books 2 through 4 construct the ideal city and identify justice within it. Books 5 through 7 develop the philosophical foundations, the theory of forms, the nature of the philosopher, and the famous Allegory of the cave. Books 8 through 9 analyze the degeneration of societies and souls. Book 10 concludes with reflections on poetry, the immortality of the soul, and the afterlife. The participants in the dialogue represent different viewpoints. Cephalus offers conventional morality. Thrasymachus represents cynical realism, might makes right. Glaucon and Adeimantus are genuine seekers who push Socrates to give his best arguments. Through their voices, Plato explores competing understandings of justice,
virtue, and the good life. It's also worth noting the historical context. Plato wrote this in the aftermath of Athens' defeat in the Peloponnesian War and the execution of Socrates in 399 BC. Athens' democracy had condemned the wisest man in the city. This tragedy haunts the Republic. When Plato writes about philosophers being rejected by their cities, when he describes the freed prisoner returning to the cave only to be threatened with death, we hear the echo of Socrates' fate. The Republic isn't just abstract philosophy. It's Plato's attempt to answer burning questions. Why did Athens execute Socrates? How could we create a society where wisdom is honored rather than condemned? What would a truly just society look like? These personal and political concerns drive the entire work.
The Republic begins with Book 1 on the search for justice. It starts a question that seems simple but proves remarkably difficult. What is justice? The conversation opens casually. Socrates has gone down to the Parineus with Glaucon to see the festival. On their way back, they're intercepted by Polemarchus and his group, who playfully insist they stay for dinner and evening celebrations. At Polemarchus's house, they find his father Cephalus, a retired businessman, now in old age. Socrates and Cephalus begin talking about old age and wealth. Cephalus suggests that wealth's main advantage is that it allows you to be just, to pay your debts, tell the truth, make proper sacrifices to the gods. This leads naturally to the question, what is justice? Cephalus offers the first definition. Justice is telling the truth and paying back what you owe. It's the conventional morality of a successful, pious businessman who wants to face death and the afterlife with a clear conscience. Socrates immediately identifies the problem. Suppose you borrowed a weapon from a friend who has now gone insane. Should you return it? If justice always means giving back what you owe, you'd have to give a sword to a madman. But that seems wrong, so justice can't simply be paying debts. Cephalus exits the conversation. He has sacrifices to perform. And his son Polemarchus takes over. Polemarchus refines the definition. Justice is giving each person what is owed to them. And what's owed? Help to friends, harm to enemies. This is more sophisticated. It sounds like the warrior's code of loyalty to allies and strength against foes. Socrates probes this definition systematically. First, what about mistakes? We sometimes think someone is a friend when they're actually harmful to us, or vice versa. Should we help apparent friends or real friends? If real friends, then justice requires wisdom to identify them. If apparent friends, then we might be helping bad people.
Second, and more fundamentally, can it ever be just to harm anyone? Socrates argues that harming people makes them worse, but justice is a virtue. It makes things better, not worse. A just person should make others more just, not less just. Therefore, deliberately harming anyone, even enemies, can't be the work of a just person. Polemarchus is persuaded, but now Thrasymachus erupts into the conversation. He's been listening impatiently, and he's had enough of this careful questioning. Justice, he declares bluntly, is nothing but the advantage of the stronger. This is the cynical realist position, and Thrasymachus articulates it forcefully. Look at any actual city, he says. Whoever holds power makes laws to benefit themselves. Democracy makes democratic laws. Tyranny makes tyrannical laws. Oligarchy makes oligarchic laws. In every case, the rulers define justice as whatever serves their interests. They called obedience to these laws justice and punished disobedience as injustice, but it's all just a tool of power. The whole idea of justice as something noble or virtuous is naive, Thrasymachus argues. In reality, the unjust person, the one who takes more than their share, who breaks rules when profitable, who looks out for themselves, ends up better off. The perfectly unjust person who can get away with injustice
is happier than the just person who follows the rules. This is the real challenge of Book 1, and it's the challenge the Republic as a whole must answer. Why should we be just? If we could get away with injustice, wouldn't we be better off? Socrates responds with several arguments. First, he examines what it means to be a true practitioner of any craft. A doctor practices medicine for the benefit of the patient, not primarily for their own profit. A ship's captain navigates for the safety of the crew and passengers, not for personal gain. Similarly, a true ruler governs for the benefit of those ruled. If someone rules only for their own advantage, they're not really exercising the craft of ruling, they're just exploiting their position.
Thrasymachus objects that this is idealistic nonsense. In the real world, rulers do benefit themselves. Socrates grants this, but insists there's a difference between true ruling and what actual rulers often do. We should distinguish the craft itself from its corrupted practice. Second, Socrates argues that even among criminals, some form of justice is necessary. A band of thieves couldn't function if they constantly betrayed and armed each other. Injustice creates conflict and faction. Even to do injustice successfully, you need some justice among your co-conspirators. Third, Socrates suggests that everything has its proper function and corresponding excellence or virtue. The eye's function is seeing, and good sight is its virtue. The pruning knife's function is pruning, and sharpness is its virtue. What's the soul's function? Living, deliberating, governing one's life. And justice is the soul's virtue, the excellence that allows it to perform its function well. An unjust soul is a defective soul, like a dull knife or a weak eye, and a defective soul can't live well. Therefore, the just person lives well and is happy, while the unjust person lives badly and is miserable. But Socrates himself isn't fully satisfied with these arguments. He's defended justice, but he hasn't really explained what justice is. At the end of Book 1, he admits this frustration. They've been arguing about whether justice is good without first establishing what justice actually is. It's like debating whether something tastes good before determining what it is. This sets up the rest of the Republic. To truly answer Thrasymachus' challenge, to show why justice is better than injustice, Socrates needs to show what justice is. And to do that, he proposes an ambitious project. Let's construct an ideal city in words. If we can see what justice looks like in a city, something large and visible, perhaps we can understand what it looks like in an individual soul. Book 1 is a masterpiece of philosophical method. Plato shows how seemingly reasonable definitions crumble under questioning. He introduces the sophistic challenge that justice is a sham, and he sets up the fundamental question that will drive the entire work. What is justice, and why should we be just?
Book 2 begins with Glaucon and Adeimantus, Plato's brothers, pushing Socrates harder. They're not satisfied with his arguments from Book 1. They want Socrates to show that justice is good in itself, not just for its consequences. Glaucon presents a powerful challenge. He divides goods into 3 types: things good only for their consequences, like medical treatment, things good only in themselves, like harmless pleasures, and things good both in themselves and for the consequences, like knowledge. Where does justice fit? Most people, Glaucon suggests, think justice is in the first category, good only for its consequences. We're just because it brings rewards and avoids punishment, not because being just is itself desirable. If we could be unjust without consequences, we would be. This suggests justice is just a compromise. We accept it only because we can't get away with injustice. Glaucon then imagines 2 extreme cases: the perfectly just person who appears unjust and suffers accordingly, versus the perfectly unjust person who appears just and reaps rewards. If justice is truly good in itself, the just person should be happier even while suffering, and the unjust person should be more miserable even while succeeding. Can Socrates defend this? Adimantus adds another dimension. Even people who praise justice, he notes, praise it for its consequences: good reputation, divine rewards, social benefits. No one praises justice itself, what it does to the soul. This reinforces the suspicion that justice is only instrumentally valuable.
These are the challenges Socrates must answer, and to do so he proposes his ambitious project. Let's create a city in words from its origins and watch justice and injustice come into being. A city is larger than an individual, so justice should be easier to see there. Once we identify justice in the city, we can look for it in the individual soul. How does a city begin? Socrates starts with the fundamental fact of human neediness. No individual is self-sufficient. We need food, shelter, clothing, tools, medicine, education. We can't each produce all these things ourselves. So people come together, each specializing in what they do best. One person farms, another builds houses, another weaves cloth, another makes shoes. Through specialization, everyone becomes more skilled at their particular craft, and through trade, everyone's needs are better met. This is the origin of the city: mutual need and mutual benefit through cooperation and specialization. But this simple city needs expansion. As it grows, it needs more specialized crafts, merchants to facilitate trade, sailors to import necessities, wage earners to do unskilled labor. It needs money as a medium of exchange. The economic foundations of the city are being established. Then comes a crucial step. This city needs protection from external threats. Not everyone can be a guardian. It requires special talents. The guardians must be fierce to enemies but gentle to citizens, like well-bred dogs who are aggressive to strangers but loyal to their household. This dual nature, spiritedness combined with philosophical temperament, requires careful cultivation. So the education of the guardians becomes paramount. Book 3 develops this education in detail. The guardians are educated through music and gymnastics. But these terms have broader meaning than we might expect. Music, or musicae, includes all the arts under the muses: poetry, song, storytelling, and cultural formation generally. Gymnastics includes physical training and discipline.
Why start with music? Because, Plato argues, stories and songs shape the soul from youth. The young guardians must hear the right stories, ones that promote courage, self-control, piety, and proper attitudes toward death, the gods, and heroes. This leads to Plato's controversial critique of traditional Greek poetry, especially Homer and Hesiod. Many traditional myths show gods behaving badly, fighting each other, deceiving mortals, causing evil. Heroes fear death excessively or fail to control their appetites. Plato argues such stories corrupt the young. They should be censored or rewritten. This isn't arbitrary prudishness. Plato believes stories shape character. If guardians learn from childhood that gods are capricious or that heroes yield to every emotion, they'll develop similar traits. If they're to be courageous and self-controlled, they need stories that model these virtues. Similarly, with style and music, certain musical modes promote appropriate emotions. Others promote weakness or license. Certain poetic styles, simple narrative, are better than others, dramatic imitation, because they don't encourage guardians to identify with multiple characters and roles. The guardian should have a unified character, not adopt different personas. Physical education is equally important, but must be balanced with cultural education. Excessive focus on gymnastics produces crude, violent people. Excessive focus on music produces soft, weak people. The proper blend produces guardians who are both spirited and philosophical.
fierce when necessary, but governed by reason. As the guardian class develops, a further division emerges. The best of the guardians, those with the strongest philosophical natures, best memories, and deepest devotion to the city's welfare, become the rulers. The rest remain auxiliaries, the warrior class. The city now has three classes: the producers, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, who handle all economic activity; the auxiliaries, warriors, who protect the city; and the rulers, philosopher-kings, who govern.
But how do we ensure the guardians and rulers remain focused on the common good, rather than their own interests? Plato's answer is radical. The guardian class has no private property. They live communally, receiving support from the producers but owning nothing themselves. They have no private wealth, no land, no accumulated possessions. Even more radically, they have no private families. Wives and children are held in common. Mating is carefully regulated by the rulers, ostensibly by lottery, but actually controlled to produce the best offspring. Children are raised collectively, not knowing who their biological parents are. Everyone treats all children of the appropriate age as their children. Why such extreme measures? Because private interests corrupt public service. If guardians own property, they become landlords, protecting their estates rather than guardians protecting the city. If they have private families, they favor their own children over others. To keep guardians entirely focused on the common good, private interests must be eliminated. Plato even proposes equality between male and female guardians. This was radically egalitarian for ancient Athens. Women with the right nature should receive the same education and perform the same roles as men. Biological differences don't determine civic roles. There's also the noble lie or myth of metals, a founding story that all citizens are born from the earth itself, but some are born with gold in their souls, the rulers, some with silver, the auxiliaries, and some with bronze and iron, the producers. This myth promotes social harmony and acceptance of one's role. But it's not rigidly hereditary. Children who show the nature of a different metal should be moved to the appropriate class. A producer's child who shows gold nature should become a ruler. A ruler's child who shows bronze nature should become a producer. The system is meritocratic, based on natural ability rather than birth. By the end of Book 3, the basic structure of the ideal city is complete. It has 3 classes, each performing its proper function. It has an elaborate educational system to shape guardian souls. It has eliminated private property and private families among the guardian class to prevent corruption. But we still haven't answered the original question: what is justice?
Book 4 begins with an objection. Adiamantus points out that the guardians don't seem very happy. They have no property, no private families, none of the things people normally seek. How is this the ideal city if the guardians are miserable? Socrates responds that they're creating the happiest city as a whole, not maximizing any particular group's happiness. The guardians aren't there to be happy as individuals, but to serve the city's welfare. And actually, he suggests they will be happy, precisely because they're living justly and virtuously, even without conventional goods. This leads to the identification of the city's virtues. Socrates proposes they search for 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Wisdom is found in the rulers. Not all knowledge is wisdom. The carpenter's knowledge or the farmer's knowledge is specialized, but not wisdom in the full sense. Wisdom is the knowledge of how the whole city should be governed. understanding what's good for each part and for the whole. Only the rulers, through their philosophical education, possess this knowledge. Courage is found in the auxiliaries, but courage isn't mere fearlessness. That could be foolhardiness or ignorance. True courage is the ability to preserve correct judgment about what is and isn't to be feared, even in pain, pleasure, desire, or fear. It's standing firm in the beliefs instilled by education about what deserves fear and what doesn't. Temperance is more complex. It's not located in just one class, but permeates the entire city. Temperance is agreement about who should rule. The rulers rule, and everyone agrees this is proper. It's harmony, everyone playing their appropriate role without conflict. The rulers govern with wisdom, the auxiliaries support them with courage, and the producers accept guidance with self-control. Now, what about justice? They found 3 of the 4 virtues. Where's the 4th?
Socrates suggests they've been walking on justice all along. Justice is what made the other virtues possible. Justice is each person doing their own work, the work they're naturally suited for, and not interfering with others' work. When producers produce, auxiliaries guard, and rulers rule, each doing their proper function without meddling in others' roles, that's justice. Justice is specialization according to nature. It's social harmony achieved through everyone performing their appropriate role. Injustice, conversely, is meddling and role confusion. When a producer tries to rule, or a ruler abandons philosophy for business, or an auxiliary becomes a politician, the city becomes disordered. Injustice is interference, trying to do what you're not suited for, disrupting the social order. But remember why they constructed this city, to understand justice in the individual soul. So now comes the crucial move. Socrates argues the soul, like the city, has 3 parts. First, there's the rational part, reason. This is the part that calculates, deliberates, seeks truth, and loves wisdom. It's like the ruler class in the city. Second, there's the spirited part, spirit or thymos in Greek. This is our sense of honor, our anger at injustice, our pride, our drive for recognition and achievement. It's like the auxiliary class in the city. Third, there's the appetitive part, appetite or desire. This seeks bodily pleasures, food, drink, sex, comfort, wealth as a means to these. It's like the producer class in the city. How do we know the soul has 3 distinct parts? From internal conflict. Sometimes we're thirsty, but know we shouldn't drink. Reason versus appetite. Sometimes we're angry, but think we shouldn't be. Reason versus spirit. Sometimes we want honor, but think the pursuit is unwise. Spirit versus reason. These conflicts show the soul isn't unified. Different parts have different aims and can pull in different directions. The 3 parts are genuinely distinct aspects of the psyche. A classic example. A man named Leontius is walking past where criminals have been executed. Part of him wants to look at the bodies, morbid curiosity and appetite. Part of him is disgusted and thinks he shouldn't. He struggles, but finally looks, and then becomes angry at himself. His spirit is angry at his appetite for overcoming his better judgment. Now, parallel to the city, each part of the soul has a corresponding virtue. Reason's virtue is wisdom, understanding what's truly good. Spirit's virtue is courage, supporting reason's judgments even against fear or desire. Appetite's virtue is temperance, accepting reason's governance. And justice? Justice in the soul is each part doing its own work. When reason rules, spirit supports reason, and appetite is controlled by reason and spirit, the soul is just. The person experiences internal harmony. Their rational part governs,
Their sense of honor supports what reason identifies as truly honorable, and their physical desires are satisfied in appropriate ways without dominating their life. This is psychological health. The just person has an ordered soul, not torn by conflicting desires, not enslaved to passion or appetite, not uncertain and confused. They know what is good, they feel rightly about it, and they act accordingly. Injustice in the soul is disorder. Perhaps appetite rules, and the person is enslaved to pleasure, constantly seeking satisfaction, but never fulfilled, unable to control their desires. Perhaps spirit rules, and they're dominated by ego and the need for recognition, burning with rage at every slight, pursuing honor at all costs. Or perhaps reason is simply weak, unable to govern, and the soul is chaos. This answers Thrasymachus' challenge from Book 1. Justice isn't just social convention or a tool of the powerful. Justice is psychological health. Being just means having a well-ordered soul, which is intrinsically valuable regardless of external consequences.
An unjust person might seem successful, wealthy, powerful, admired, but if their soul is disordered, they're like someone with a grave disease who doesn't realize they're sick. They might feel fine for a while, but they're fundamentally unhealthy. A just person might suffer externally, poverty, rejection, even torture. But if their soul is ordered, reason governing, spirit supporting reason, desires controlled, they maintain internal harmony. And this internal harmony is more valuable than any external good. Socrates drives this home with a series of questions. Is it profitable to be unjust? Only if it's profitable to have a diseased soul. Should we do whatever we want? Only if what we want means what reason identifies as truly good. Is the tyrant who can satisfy every whim happy? Only if satisfying every passing desire produces genuine happiness, which it doesn't. The just person's advantage isn't contingent on rewards or avoiding punishment. It's that justice is health of the soul, and that's intrinsically better than disease of the soul, just as physical health is intrinsically better than sickness. Book 4 completes the first major movement of the Republic. We now have an answer to what is justice, both in the city, each class doing its work, and in the soul, each part doing its work. And we have an answer to why be just, because justice is psychological health, valuable in itself. But this raises deeper questions. How do we know what's truly good? What makes the rulers wise? What is this reason that's supposed to govern? These questions lead to the philosophical heart of the Republic, the theory of forms.
Book 5 begins with Socrates trying to move on, but the others stop him. He's mentioned women and children being held in common among the guardians, but hasn't explained how this works. They demand details. Socrates reluctantly elaborates. Male and female guardians with the right nature receive the same education and perform the same roles. Physical differences don't determine civic function any more than baldness determines who should be a shoemaker. If women have the right nature, philosophical temperament, courage, physical strength, they should be guardians and rulers alongside men. The communal mating system is elaborate. Ostensibly, there are festivals where mating partners are chosen by lottery, but the rulers secretly manipulate the lottery to ensure the best mate with the best, producing the finest offspring. Children are taken at birth and raised collectively. No one knows who their biological parents or children are. The rationale is the same as communal property. Private families create divided loyalties. If everyone considers all children theirs, everyone cares for all children.
The entire guardian class becomes one family. Warfare is also discussed. The city's warriors should be brave, but not cruel. Fellow Greeks should be treated as misguided family, not enemies to be enslaved. Wars should aim at reconciliation, not destruction. Then comes the proposal that has echoed through 2,300 years of philosophy. Unless philosophers become kings, or kings become philosophers, cities will never be free from evils, nor will the human race. This sounds absurd. Philosophers, those impractical people debating abstract questions, should run governments? But Socrates defends it carefully. First, what is a philosopher? Not just someone who likes thinking. A philosopher is someone who loves wisdom, who desires all of it, not just some part. They're lovers of truth, seekers of genuine knowledge.
This distinction between knowledge and opinion becomes crucial. Most people have opinions about things. This is beautiful. That is just. But their opinions shift with context. The same thing seems beautiful in some ways, ugly in others. Just in some cases, unjust in others. They're dealing with appearances, with things that appear a certain way but aren't stable or fully real. The philosopher seeks what's truly beautiful, truly just. Not things that appear beautiful or just, but what beauty and justice actually are. This leads directly to Plato's theory of forms, developed in books 6 and 7. According to Plato, reality is divided into two realms. There's the visible realm, the physical world we perceive with our senses, and there's the intelligible realm, the realm of forms, grasped by reason alone. What's a form? Take beauty. There are many beautiful things in the physical world. Beautiful faces, sunsets, songs. These are all different, and their beauty is relative and changeable. What's beautiful to one person may not be to another. What's beautiful in youth becomes less so with age. But there must be something that makes all beautiful things beautiful. That something is the form of beauty itself. Eternal, unchanging, fully real beauty that exists independently of any particular beautiful thing. Individual beautiful things are beautiful because they participate in, or reflect, or imitate the form of beauty. The same applies to everything. There are many circular things, but they all participate in the form of the circle. Perfect mathematical circularity that no physical circle perfectly embodies. There are many just acts, but they all participate in the form of justice. There are many good things, but they all participate in the form of the good. The physical world is the world of becoming. Things come into being, change, and pass away. The realm of forms is the world of being, eternal, unchanging, fully real.
This has epistemological implications. Knowledge is of what is real and unchanging, the forms. The physical world is constantly changing, so we can only have opinion or belief about it. True knowledge is of the forms. This is why philosophers should rule. Philosophers study the forms. They pursue knowledge of what's truly just, truly good, truly beautiful. Everyone else deals only with changing appearances and conflicting opinions. The philosopher has ascended from opinion to knowledge, from appearance to reality. But what's the highest form? The form of the good. Just as the sun in the visible realm makes things visible and gives life, the form of the good in the intelligible realm makes all other forms intelligible and gives them their being. To understand the good is to understand the ultimate source and purpose of everything. Only someone who knows the good can truly govern justly. Only they understand what the city should aim at. Only they can distinguish genuine goods from apparent goods, true justice from conventional justice. But there's a deep irony here. Philosophers don't want to rule. They've ascended to knowledge of the forms, to contemplation of the good. Why would they descend back to the messy business of governing people who don't understand what they're talking about? And that's precisely why they should rule. The person who wants power is the last person who should have it. They'll use it for themselves. The reluctant ruler, the person who governs out of duty, not desire, is the only trustworthy ruler. To illustrate all of this, the difference between appearance and reality, the journey from ignorance to knowledge, the philosopher's duty to return and govern, Plato presents the allegory of the cave, the most famous passage in the Republic.
Imagine prisoners in an underground cave, chained since childhood so they can only look forward at the cave wall. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners is a low wall like a puppet theater. People carry objects along this wall, statues, artifacts, figures of animals and humans. The fire casts shadows of these objects onto the wall the prisoners face. The prisoners have never seen anything else. These shadows are their entire reality. They name the shadows. Look, a horse shadow. There's the tree shadow again. They notice patterns and become experts at predicting which shadows will appear next. They honored those among them who were best at predicting shadows. They think they understand reality. Now, imagine one prisoner is freed. Someone breaks his chains and forces him to stand and turn around. The firelight hurts his eyes. The actual objects casting shadows seem strange and confusing, less real than the familiar shadows he's watched his whole life. He wants to turn back to what he knows. But he's dragged up through the cave, a painful and disorienting journey. His legs are weak from chains. His eyes hurt. Finally, he's pulled out of the cave entirely, into sunlight. At first, he's completely blinded. The sun is too bright. He can't see anything. But gradually, his eyes adjust. First, he sees reflections in water, shadows on the ground. Then he can look at actual objects, trees, rocks, animals, humans. Then he looks at the night sky, stars, moon. Finally, he can look at the sun itself. And he realizes this is reality. Everything in the cave was illusion, shadows of shadows. This is truth. The sun illuminates everything, makes everything visible, makes life itself possible. Without the sun, there would be nothing to see. The freed prisoner is overwhelmed with this realization. Everything he thought he knew was false. Everything other prisoners think they know is false. He must go back. He must free them. He must show them what he's seen.
So he descends back into the cave. But now, his eyes, adjusted to sunlight, can't see in the darkness. He stumbles. He can't make out the shadows properly anymore. The other prisoners, who never left, mock him. Look what going up there did to him. He's lost his expertise. He can't even see the shadows properly now. The journey ruined him. We're better off staying here. When he tries to free them, to tell them about the sun and real world outside, they don't believe him. They think he's crazy. Why would they leave the comfort of what they know for some insane story about a sun and a real world? They're comfortable. They understand their world. They're the experts here. And if he persists, if he tries to force them to be freed, they might become violent. They might kill him to protect their comfortable illusions. The allegory operates on multiple levels, simultaneously. On an educational level, it illustrates the difference between ignorance and knowledge. Most people are prisoners in the cave, mistaking appearances for reality. Education isn't putting knowledge into empty minds. It's turning the soul from darkness to light, from shadows to reality. It's painful. It requires effort. The educator must sometimes drag unwilling students toward truth, and many resist because learning challenges everything they thought they knew. On a philosophical level, it illustrates the theory of forms. The prisoners see shadows, opinions about particular things. The fire represents the physical sun and physical objects, the visible realm. The journey upward represents the ascent from the visible to the intelligible. The sun itself represents the form of the good, the ultimate reality that makes all knowledge possible.
On a political level, it explains why philosopher-kings must rule and why they don't want to. Philosophers have left the cave. They've seen the forms, contemplated the good. They understand reality. But everyone else is arguing about shadows, conflicting opinions, conventional beliefs, appearances mistaken for truth. How can you have a just society if it's governed by people who don't know what justice actually is? The philosopher must return to the cave, must descend from contemplation to governance. This is their duty. They owe their education to the city that nurtured them. They must help those still in darkness. But it's genuinely costly. They prefer the sunlight of truth to the darkness of political life. They govern reluctantly, out of duty, not desire. And this reluctance is precisely what makes them trustworthy rulers. Someone who desires power will use it for themselves. Someone who governs reluctantly, who returns to political life only out of obligation, is far less likely to abuse power. On a deeply personal level, for Plato, the allegory reflects the fate of Socrates. Socrates was the freed prisoner who returned to Athens trying to wake people from their illusions. He questioned conventional beliefs, challenged comfortable assumptions, insisted on examining life rather than simply living it. And Athens killed him for it. The prisoners killed the one trying to free them. The cave allegory is thus simultaneously an account of education, epistemology, metaphysics, political philosophy, and personal tragedy. It's no wonder it has captivated readers for millennia. Book 7 continues with the educational curriculum for philosopher-kings. It's rigorous and extensive. From childhood, they study music and gymnastics. Then comes mathematics, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, understood mathematically, not just observing the heavens, and harmonics, the mathematical study of music. Why mathematics? Because it draws the soul from the changing physical world to the eternal and unchanging. Mathematical truths are timeless. The triangle's angles always sum to 180 degrees, regardless of any particular triangle. After years of mathematical study, at around age 30, the best students advanced to dialectic, the art of philosophical reasoning. Dialectic examines the assumptions underlying beliefs, tests definitions, seeks the forms themselves. This is the highest form of knowledge, the direct apprehension of truth. But education isn't purely theoretical. From ages 30 to 35, the students return to practical life, military service, civic administration. They must experience the cave again, must understand the challenges of governing actual human beings with their opinions and passions. At 35, the best return to dialectic and study of the forms for 15 years. Only at age 50, after decades of education, practical experience, and philosophical contemplation, are they ready to rule. And even then, they take turns, governing for a period, then returning to philosophical study, then governing again. This ensures several things. Rulers have genuine wisdom, not just cleverness. They understand both theory and practice. They remain philosophers, not professional politicians. And they govern reluctantly, as a duty to be discharged,
prefer returning to what they truly love, the pursuit of wisdom.
The irony is profound. The people who should rule don't want to. The people who want to rule shouldn't. The ideal political system requires the wisest to govern against their preferences. They must be compelled by duty, by gratitude for their education, by the recognition that if they don't rule, lesser people will, and the city will suffer.
Having described the ideal city, aristocracy ruled by philosopher-kings, Plato now traces its inevitable decline. Books 8 and 9 present a taxonomy of regimes and soul types, showing how each form of government emerges from the corruption of the previous one. This isn't just political science. For each regime type, Plato describes a corresponding individual soul type. The structure of the city mirrors the structure of the soul. As cities degenerate, so do the souls of individuals who live in them. Why does even the ideal city decline? Plato suggests it's almost mathematically inevitable. The rulers use a complex mathematical formula to determine the optimal times for mating to produce the best offspring. But eventually, they'll make errors in these calculations. The wrong people will become guardians. People unsuited to rule will gain power. Once the guardian class includes those who lack true philosophical nature, decline begins. The first degeneration produces timocracy, ruled by those who seek honor and glory rather than wisdom. How does this happen? The children of philosopher-kings are supposed to be educated properly, but imagine a scenario. A young man's father is a true philosopher-king, but his mother and servants tell him his father is too unworldly, not concerned enough with wealth and status. They encourage him toward more conventional ambitions. This young man develops a split character. Part of him respects his father's wisdom. Part of him desires the wealth and honor his mother and servants value. Eventually, the spirited part of his soul, the part seeking honor and recognition, wins out over reason. He becomes timocratic, ruled by love of honor rather than wisdom.
In a timocratic regime, the warrior class has taken over from the philosophers. Now the focus is on military glory, athletic competitions, honor, and reputation. These leaders respect wisdom somewhat. They were educated by philosopher-kings, after all, but they value honor more. They're brave, they enforce discipline, they maintain order, but they're also more concerned with appearances than truth. The timocratic individual is similar. He's brave, disciplined, respectful of authority, but he's secretly starting to value wealth, which he hoards privately. He's ambitious for honor and victory. His reason has been demoted. Spirit rules his soul. How does timocracy degenerate into oligarchy? The timocratic leaders accumulate private wealth. Over generations, wealth becomes more important than honor. Those who have wealth gain power. Those without wealth lose power. Eventually, wealth becomes the qualification for ruling. You have oligarchy, rule by the wealthy few. In an oligarchy, there's a property requirement for political participation. The rich rule, the poor are excluded. The city divides into two hostile camps: the wealthy minority living in luxury, the poor majority struggling and resentful. The oligarchs are soft, having grown up in wealth without the discipline of philosophical or military training. They're fearful of their own poor, relying on hired soldiers rather than citizen warriors. The oligarchic individual is ruled by his appetites, specifically necessary appetites like the desire for wealth as a means to security and pleasure. He's frugal in some ways since he hoards wealth rather than spending it, but his frugality comes from appetite, not reason. He wants to accumulate, not to live wisely. He appears respectable, but is internally disordered.
His better impulses, reason and spirit, have been subordinated to appetite. The transition from oligarchy to democracy is practically inevitable. The oligarchs raised in luxury become weak. The poor, doing all the actual work, become strong and resentful. Perhaps in war, the poor soldiers see their wealthy commanders are cowards. Eventually, the poor revolt, overthrow the oligarchs, and establish democracy, rule by the people.
In a democracy, everyone is free and equal. Everyone can say whatever they want. There are no strict rules about who should do what. You can pursue whatever lifestyle you prefer. No particular expertise is privileged. The doctor's opinion isn't worth more than the layman's. There's liberty and diversity. Different people live different ways. It sounds ideal. But Plato sees fatal flaws. Democratic freedom becomes excessive. There's no respect for authority, expertise, or order. Children disobey parents and show no respect. Students treat teachers as equals or inferiors. No one wants to be told what to do or accept any limits. Even animals, Plato jokes, walk around with a sense of entitlement, expecting humans to get out of their way. More seriously, democracy conflates freedom with license. The democratic citizen thinks doing whatever they want whenever they want is freedom. They have no unified purpose or direction. One day they drink and party, the next day they diet and exercise, then they dabble in philosophy, then they go into politics, then they pursue business. They're a patchwork of random desires with no rational governance. The democratic individual has a similar soul. All appetites are treated as equal. Necessary appetites, food, shelter, have no more claim than unnecessary ones, luxuries, idle pleasures. Even shameful appetites are indulged. What's shameful to one person is fine for another, according to democratic relativism. This person calls all desires equal and satisfies whichever is strongest at the moment. Their life has no order, no hierarchy, no rational plan. They're enslaved to the tyranny of passing whims while thinking they're free. Democracy's excessive freedom creates chaos. People become uncomfortable with this disorder. They want security, stability, someone strong who can restore order. A leader emerges, often from the wealthy class, who presents himself as a champion of the people against corrupt elites. He promises to fix everything, restore greatness, protect the common people.
At first, he's popular. He redistributes some wealth, cancels debts, gives people what they want. But to maintain power, he needs bodyguards. He's made enemies. He needs to eliminate rivals. He accuses them of treason. He needs to keep people distracted. He starts wars. Gradually, he accumulates absolute power. Democracy has given birth to its opposite, tyranny, rule by one person for their own benefit. The tyrant maintains power through fear. He's surrounded by flatterers who tell him what he wants to hear, and mercenaries who have no loyalty to the city. He trusts no one because anyone could be a threat. He must constantly eliminate potential rivals. He impoverishes the city to pay his guards. He starts wars to keep people dependent on him. And despite appearing powerful, the tyrant is the most miserable person imaginable. Why? Because of his soul's condition. The tyrannical individual is ruled by lawless appetites, desires most people suppress even in dreams. He's like an addict, enslaved to his cravings. Nothing satisfies him. Every pleasure immediately generates desire for more. He's consumed by desire, fear, and paranoia. He's surrounded by flatterers, but has no real friends. How could he, when he trusts no one? He can't love anyone, because love requires valuing someone else's good, and he values only his own pleasure. He's isolated in the midst of his court. He's constantly anxious. Despite his power, he's like a prisoner who can never leave his palace for fear of being killed. He's enslaved by his own desires and fears.
Every appetite must be satisfied immediately, but satisfaction never brings peace, just new appetites. Plato ranks the types of individuals from best to worst. The philosophical person, reason ruling; the timocratic person, spirit ruling; the oligarchic person, necessary appetites ruling; the democratic person, all appetites treated equally; and finally, the tyrannical person, lawless appetites ruling. Each is progressively more disordered and miserable.
This completes Plato's answer to Thrasymachus' challenge from Book 1. Thrasymachus claimed injustice is more profitable, that the perfectly unjust person who can get away with it is happier than the just person. The tyrant is this perfectly unjust person. He has absolute power to satisfy every whim. No one can punish him. He's beyond all law and restraint. And yet, he's the most miserable. His soul is diseased. He's enslaved by his appetites. He's friendless, fearful, never satisfied. The philosophical person, even if poor or suffering, maintains internal harmony and is genuinely happy. The tyrant, despite wealth and power, is in psychological hell. Justice is its own reward because it's health of the soul. Injustice is its own punishment because it's disease of the soul. This is true regardless of external consequences, rewards, or punishments. The tyrant proves it. He escapes all external punishment, but suffers the worst internal punishment, the condition of his own soul.
Book 10 serves as a coda to the Republic, addressing three seemingly disparate topics that actually complete the dialogue's argument. First, Plato returns to the critique of poetry and imitative art that he began in Books 2 and 3. Now having developed the theory of forms, he can explain more fully why poetry must be excluded from the ideal city. The argument is this: imitative art is thrice removed from truth. Consider a bed. First, there's the form of bed, the eternal, perfect idea of what a bed is, created, in some sense, by God. Second, there's the physical bed made by the carpenter, a copy of the form. Third, there's the painting of a bed made by the artist, a copy of the copy. The painter doesn't even need to know how beds are made or used. He just reproduces appearances. He creates images that look like things, but lack the reality. And viewers who don't know better might think they're learning about beds by looking at paintings when they're actually moving further from truth. This applies to all imitative poetry and drama. Homer depicts warriors, but he never was a warrior. He depicts statesmen, but he never governed. His work is appearance twice removed from reality. And yet, readers think Homer teaches them about courage, wisdom, and virtue. They're learning from shadows. Even more problematically, poetry appeals to the emotional part of the soul rather than the rational part. Tragic poetry makes us identify with characters' grief, passion, and suffering. We exercise the emotional parts of our souls, strengthening them when we should be strengthening reason's control. When we watch tragedy, we permit ourselves emotions we'd suppress in real life. We weep over fictional sufferings when weeping over our own would be shameful. This emotional indulgence weakens rational control. For guardians who need reason firmly in command, this is dangerous. Comedy does something similar. We laugh at jokes and behaviors that we'd find shameful in ourselves. By identifying with shameful characters and laughing at shameful acts, we gradually become more shameful ourselves.
Plato acknowledges the seductive power of poetry. Even he feels it. But poetry must be examined by reason, not simply enjoyed. And if poetry can't defend itself rationally, can't show that it leads to truth and virtue rather than away from them, it must be excluded from the ideal city. There's deep irony here. The Republic itself is magnificent literature. Plato is one of the greatest literary artists in Western civilization. The cave allegory is vivid imagery. The entire dialogue is dramatic and engaging. Yet Plato criticizes poetry and imitation. Some scholars see this as Plato acknowledging the tension between philosophy and poetry, reason and emotion, truth and beauty. He recognizes poetry's power, but insists it must be subordinated to philosophy. Others see it as Plato distinguishing between poetry that serves truth, like his own philosophically dialogues, and poetry that merely entertains or inflames emotions. Second, Plato argues for the immortality of the soul. This seems like a digression, but it's actually crucial to the dialogue's argument about justice. The argument is complex, but the basic idea is this. Each thing is destroyed by its own specific evil or vice. The body's evil is disease, which destroys it. Wood's evil is rot, which destroys it. Iron's evil is rust, which destroys it. What's the soul's evil? Injustice, cowardice, ignorance, the vices that make a soul bad. But do these destroy the soul in the way disease destroys the body? We see unjust people living to old age. Injustice doesn't kill the soul in the way disease kills the body. If the soul's own proper evil does not destroy it, and nothing else can destroy it, since by definition only a thing's own evil can destroy it, then the soul must be immortal. It cannot be destroyed by injustice or anything else.
Why does this matter? Because it means justice and injustice have consequences beyond this life. The just person who suffers in this life isn't ultimately harmed. The unjust person who prospers in this life hasn't ultimately escaped consequences. This leads to the third section of Book 10, the myth of which Socrates presents as an account of the afterlife. Was a warrior who died in battle. After 10 days, his body hadn't decayed. He was placed on a funeral pyre, but before it was lit, he revived and told what he'd seen. He described a place of judgment where souls arrive after death. Just souls are sent upward to heaven, where they receive rewards for their justice, 1,000 years of joy for every year they live justly. Unjust souls are sent downward to punishment, 1,000 years of suffering for every year they lived unjustly. After their time in reward or punishment, souls gather to choose their next lives. They're shown many possible lives, humans of various types, animals of various species. Each soul must choose. Some choose wisely. A soul that had lived justly and gained wisdom chooses carefully, seeking a good life suited to philosophy and virtue. Others choose foolishly. One soul that had been rewarded in heaven but learned nothing, had been just only by habit, not understanding, chooses the life of a tyrant, thinking it will bring pleasure and power. Only after choosing does this soul realize what it's chosen, a life of eating one's own children and other horrors. It had been dazzled by appearance, not understanding reality. Orpheus's soul, remembering how it died at the hands of women, chooses to be a swan. Agamemnon's soul, remembering its murder, chooses to be an eagle. Ajax's soul, remembering its defeat, chooses to be a lion. But some souls choose remarkably well. The soul of Odysseus, exhausted by ambition and striving, chooses the life of a private citizen who minds his own business, a life of philosophical contemplation rather than worldly achievement.
After choosing, souls drink from the river of forgetfulness and are born into their new lives, remembering nothing of their choice or the afterlife. The myth reinforces several themes. First, justice and injustice have ultimate consequences. You can't escape by dying. There's judgment and reward or punishment beyond this life. Second, the choices we make shape our souls for eternity. Third, true wisdom is recognizing what's genuinely good versus what merely appears good. The soul that chooses tyranny chose appearance over reality. But Plato's purpose in ending with a myth is significant. He's moved beyond arguments to imagination. The myth isn't meant to be literally true. It's a story, explicitly called a myth. But it conveys truths that pure argument can't fully capture. It suggests that justice isn't just about this life or this city. It's about the soul's ultimate condition. The philosophical life, the examined life, the life of seeking truth and practicing virtue has cosmic significance. How we live matters not just socially or psychologically, but metaphysically. The Republic ends with Socrates' final exhortation. We shall hold always to the upward way and pursue justice with wisdom in every way, that we may be dear to ourselves and to the gods, both while we remain here and when we receive our rewards, like victors in the games collecting prizes. Live justly, seek wisdom, order your soul properly, and you'll fare well both in this life and in whatever comes after. The just person, even if they suffer every external evil, maintains internal harmony and will ultimately be rewarded. The unjust person, even if they prosper in every external way, suffers internal disorder and will ultimately face consequences. This is the final answer to Thrasymachus. Justice is its own reward because it's health of the soul, which is the most valuable thing. And if there's an afterlife, justice brings eternal reward, while injustice brings eternal punishment. Either way, you should be just.
So what is the Republic ultimately about? At its heart, it's an investigation into justice, what it is, and why it's valuable. But from this central question, Plato constructs an entire philosophical vision encompassing ethics, politics, metaphysics, epistemology, psychology, and aesthetics. The Republic argues that justice is internal harmony, each part of the soul performing its proper function under reason's governance. This makes justice intrinsically valuable, regardless of external consequences. The just person has psychological health, which is better than any external good. The unjust person suffers psychological disease, which is worse than any external harm. This individual justice mirrors political justice. The ideal city has three classes: rulers, auxiliaries, and producers, just as the soul has three parts: reason, spirit, and appetites. When each performs its proper function without interference, you have justice, social harmony achieved through appropriate specialization. But to govern justly, rulers must know what justice truly is. This requires philosophical knowledge, understanding the forms, rather than merely having opinions about appearances. Only philosopher-kings who've studied the forms and comprehended the good can govern with true wisdom. The theory of forms is Plato's metaphysical foundation. Reality consists of eternal, perfect forms that physical things imperfectly copy or participate in. True knowledge is of forms, grasped by reason. Opinion is of physical things, perceived by senses. Education is turning the soul from the shadows of opinion to the light of knowledge, the cave allegory's central message. But even the ideal city declines. Through timocracy, oligarchy, and democracy, society degenerates to tyranny. Parallel to these regime types are soul types, each progressively more disordered. The tyrant represents maximum injustice, apparent power but actual slavery to lawless appetites, maximum misery disguised as success. The Republic has profoundly influenced Western thought for over 2,300 years. Its impact appears in multiple domains. Political philosophy. The Republic is foundational to Western political thought. Its questions, who should rule? What is justice? How do we create a good society? Remain central to political philosophy. The debate between rule by experts, philosopher-kings, versus rule by the people, democracy, continues today as debates about technocracy, populism, and democratic legitimacy. Plato's critique of democracy anticipated problems that democracies have faced throughout history. The danger of demagogues who manipulate public opinion, the tension between liberty and order, the challenge of making collective decisions when citizens disagree about fundamental values, the risk that democracy might destroy itself by granting power to those who would abolish democratic freedoms. The Republic also influenced utopian thinking. Thomas More's Utopia, Tommaso Campanella's City of the Sun, and numerous other utopian visions drew inspiration from Plato's ideal city. Even dystopian works like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984 respond to Platonic themes. The dangers of rule by a supposedly enlightened elite, the elimination of family and privacy, and the use of education as indoctrination. Metaphysics and epistemology. The theory of forms became central to Western metaphysics. It shaped how philosophers thought about universals, abstract objects, and the relationship between appearance and reality. Medieval philosophers like Augustine and Aquinas adapted Platonic forms to Christian theology, identifying forms with ideas in God's mind. The distinction between knowledge and opinion, between reason and sense perception, between the intelligible and the visible structured epistemological debates for centuries. Rationalists like Descartes emphasized reason over senses, echoing Plato. Empiricists like Locke and Hume rejected forms but had to grapple with Plato's arguments.
Psychology. Plato's tripartite division of the soul, reason, spirit, appetite, anticipated later psychological theories. Freud's division into ego, superego, and id has obvious parallels. Contemporary psychology's recognition of multiple cognitive systems, rational deliberation versus emotional reactions, controlled versus automatic processing, echoes Platonic insights about internal conflict and the challenge of rational self-governance. Ethics, the Republic's argument that virtue is its own reward, that justice is psychological health, profoundly influenced virtue ethics. The idea that being virtuous makes you genuinely happy regardless of external consequences became central to ancient ethics and remains influential today. The analogy between physical health and psychological health, that justice is to the soul what health is to the body, provided a naturalistic foundation for ethics. Just as we can identify bodily health objectively by proper functioning, we might identify psychological health objectively by proper soul functioning. Education. Plato's vision of education as turning the soul from darkness to light, not merely filling minds with information, has influenced educational philosophy ever since. The idea that education should develop character, not just skills, that it should cultivate wisdom, not just cleverness, that it requires transforming students' values and perspectives. These Platonic themes recur throughout Western education. Aesthetics. Plato's critique of poetry raised questions about art's relationship to truth, its moral effects, and its proper role in society that philosophers and critics still debate. Should art serve truth? Should it be morally edifying? Can it provide knowledge or only pleasure? These questions originated in the Republic.
But the Republic is also deeply problematic, and its problems are worth acknowledging. The ideal city is rigid and totalitarian. the elimination of private property and private families among guardians, the manipulation of mating through rigged lotteries, the censorship of poetry, the noble lie about metals and souls. These measures seem oppressive, even dystopian. Karl Popper, in The Open Society and Its Enemies, argued that Plato's Republic is fundamentally anti-democratic and proto-totalitarian. The theory of forms raises serious problems. Where exactly do forms exist? How do physical things participate in them? Can there be forms of bad things like disease or injustice? If forms are eternal and unchanging, how can they explain a changing world? Plato's own student Aristotle subjected the forms to devastating criticism. The argument for philosopher-kings is questionable. Who determines who's a philosopher? How do we prevent the philosopher-king system from becoming ruled by a self-perpetuating elite claiming wisdom they don't possess? Doesn't everyone think their beliefs are knowledge rather than mere opinion? The epistemic arrogance of claiming to know the good while others merely have opinions is dangerous. The treatment of women is progressive for ancient Athens, equal education and roles for those with the right nature, but still problematic. Women are only included if they have masculine virtues. The assumption that most women aren't suited for guardian roles reflects ancient prejudices, even if Plato challenges them more than his contemporaries. The critique of democracy seems uncharitable. Yes, democracy has dangers that Plato identified, but Plato doesn't seriously engage with democracy's merits, the value of political equality, the danger of concentrated power, the benefits of diverse perspectives in decision-making, the importance of individual liberty. Yet, despite these problems, the Republic endures. Why? Because it asks the right questions, even if its answers are debatable. What is justice? Who should rule? What is real versus apparent? How should we live? What is knowledge versus opinion? These questions remain urgent.
The Republic also demonstrates philosophical method at its best. Plato doesn't lecture. He shows Socrates questioning, arguing, constructing hypotheses, testing them, revising them. Philosophy is a dynamic process of inquiry, not a fixed body of doctrine. The cave allegory alone justifies the Republic's enduring relevance. It's one of the most powerful images in Western thought, a vivid representation of the human condition, of our tendency to mistake comfortable illusions for truth, of the difficulty and necessity of genuine education, of the philosopher's duty and danger. Contemporary readers can engage with the Republic in multiple ways. We can study it historically, understanding ancient Greek philosophy and Plato's responses to his context. We can read it critically, identifying its flaws and limitations. We can read it charitably, seeking its insights while recognizing its problems. We can read it philosophically, using it to think through perennial questions about justice, knowledge, and the good life. The Republic isn't a book you agree or disagree with. It's too complex and multifaceted for simple acceptance or rejection. It's a book you think with, argue with, learn from, even when you disagree with it. 2,300 years after it was written, The Republic remains essential reading for anyone interested in philosophy, politics, ethics, or the fundamental questions of human existence. Not because it provides final answers, it doesn't, but because it asks the right questions in the right way, and because thinking through Plato's arguments, whether we accept or reject them, makes us better thinkers. The examined life, Socrates said in Plato's Apology, is the only life worth living. The Republic is an extended exploration of what examining life means, questioning assumptions, seeking truth beyond appearances, ordering our souls rationally, pursuing justice not for rewards, but because justice is psychologically healthy.
Whether or not we accept Plato's metaphysics, his politics, or his ethics, this call to examination remains vital. Are we living thoughtfully or merely drifting? Are we pursuing what's truly good or just what appears good? Are we governed by reason or enslaved to appetite? Have we left the cave or are we still watching shadows? These questions matter as much today as they did in 380 BC. And that's why, after 2,300 years, we're still reading the Republic.